Hello, followers. Fit22 here. Before I begin, I need to let you all know this video is the finale to a series my friend Swamp Dweller has on his channel, read by yours truly. If you'd like to hear the 2 parts before this one, click the link in the description below. Enjoy, and I will see you soon. As I fall, I feel gnashing, and for a time unknown, that felt like years, I felt I was being eaten alive, again and again. A flood of agony and pain overcame my body and psyche as I struggled to focus on something, anything, that wasn't pain. It was impossible though, as I was stricken by pain unimaginable, and images that are near impossible to explain. I felt tears and I heard screams. I felt as though these tears and screams were my own. They resonated throughout the darkness, from all areas, but most painfully, from within myself. Then it was over. I opened my eyes to darkness. I looked around, unsure of my surroundings, but stricken by the shock of seeing my body unscathed. How long had I been here? Was the pain real? I felt a sudden bout of nausea welling within. I took a step and then vomited. Dizzy for a moment, I looked on in horror as through blood-laden stomach contents, I noticed pieces of hair and flesh. The shadows around me were soon filled with laughter and the sound of flesh ripped from bone. The voices, the screams, the laughter, they were all my own. From the dark abyss before me, a path began to grow. As I walked, I saw violet smiles and a carpet made of flesh. The flesh created a long path laden with what seemed to be twisted versions of my own face. Some licked their lips, others had unnaturally sharp teeth. Though they never bit me, I felt their tongues, elongated and wrong, licking my legs, and some even my face. I stopped for a moment, sickened at the realization that I could taste my own flesh as they did this. I felt a pang of hunger and a sudden craving for my own flesh. This was worsened by the sight of horribly deformed versions of myself appearing to the sides of the road of flesh and faces. I saw myself, naked and emaciated, gnawing on pieces of my other self. Every step I took, I felt myself getting heavier. I could taste blood on my lips and feel the pain of my flesh being ripped from my own body, despite the fact I wasn't doing this to myself. It was as though my mind, soul, and body existed in many times at once. I cried out in pain with every bite, while simultaneously relishing and being sickened by the taste of every bite. I felt sick, as at times I would vomit up my own contents. Contents the other me's were eating. Then, much to my horror, as I crawled forward, I heard the sounds of contorting flesh, and looked behind myself. There, a naked man in my image smiled as he bent his elbows and knees backwards and walked on all fours, snapping his upside-down neck before rolling his eyes back with a sick smile and lapping up the bloody vomit like it was coffee. I threw up more before growing dizzier. I didn't have the mind to understand how what was happening, but I stood and pressed forward. The road lengthened before me as I heard a disturbing cackling behind me. The cackling continued between slurps of vomit that sent me sideways in disgust. I fell to my knees, but crawling further until I looked back to see the contorted version of myself salivating. As he licked his lips, the other versions of myself turned in attention, dropping the bits of my eaten selves all at once. They froze in unison, and their smiles grew unnaturally wide. Some even ripped off part of their skin around their mouth, while others cut into the flesh, and their teeth grew. There was a moment of pause as I stood up, and inside I knew I needed to run for it. There was a moment of pause as I stood up, and inside I knew I needed to run for it. I began to run, and as I did, the mad ones behind me began to scramble on all fours. That was all it took for the others to leap from their areas with an intense ferocity. I felt my stomach as it proceeded to fill with a voracious hunger. The faster I ran, the more their eyes widened. As I rushed forth, I looked back to see the version of me on all fours devouring the other me's in one bound. One by one, I saw the other versions of myself snapped into pieces, and I felt a sickening pain course through my body. As the demented monstrosity behind me continued to eat, I noticed it had begun to grow more limbs. The limbs would sprout from all parts of its body, contorting further, and the flesh would rip open, revealing many mouths, and in some cases, other sets of eyes. I ran with all the energy left inside me, and easily faster than I'd ever run in my entire lifetime. The laughter behind me was growing into a distorted and incoherent cacophony of sound. I heard the monster coming, its large hands and many mouths groaning in pain and glee. I felt my body dying, or that'd be the best description of what I felt. Every time I felt myself fading or was sure I was going to die, I'd scream as I was revitalized by an unending pain from one of my other selves being eaten alive. The demon behind me grew heavier, and as he did, he began to slow. I continued running, vomiting and screaming along the way. I soon slipped in my bloody vomit, falling on my face before immediately crawling with all my strength across the flesh-laden floor. I felt myself licked by floor, and suddenly was overcome by many tongues from the monster behind me. I felt them trying to drag me back as I crawled across the ground. The weight was growing as they pulled more, and soon, one of my fingernails snapped off in my desperate attempt to claw forward. I wouldn't let this thing devour me. I couldn't. I soon saw the end of the road. A door sat before me, a faint glow coming from behind it. I clawed forward, ripping into the flesh on the ground and ripping up chunks of meat and skin, which I threw back and watched this thing devour. I felt unimaginable pain as I continued clawing. The hot breath of the beast beginning to blow down my neck as it grew closer. It was growing slower as it ate more meat I threw its way. Looking back, I saw an unrecognizable blob with many eyes, mouths, and tongues. The mass had stopped moving, its many voices groaning in lust for meat. I felt more tongues wrap around my neck and body as I tried moving forward. I threw meat back, but the figure was focused on me now. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of and began biting the tongues around my mouth, nearly choking from those around my throat. I tore through the tongues, spitting them out as I did. My body retched in pain as I pressed on until I felt myself moving forward, inch by inch. I continued this, and the entity behind me screamed in unison with me. The pain was impossibly agonizing now as I felt the taste of elongated tongues, their blood coursing down my throat as I ripped through them with my teeth. After what seemed like a moment that would have no end, I felt the tongues on me unravel and heard the groans of pain behind me. I snapped forward, smashing my face into the sink in front of me. I unraveled the remaining pieces of tongue from my body, which soon writhed and continued to move as though still wishing to taste my flesh. I stomped on them before throwing it back at the blob behind me. I saw its veins pulsating as it snatched up the tongues and ate them. There was only a ravenous hunger in its eyes as I looked on in horror before turning away and heading towards the door. I opened the door with a groan and fell in. The door vanished behind me, and I suddenly felt as close to normal as I had since I fell into this place. There was an unsatiable hunger inside of me, but there was no longer any other pain or the taste of flesh in my mouth. It was only the leftover taste of blood. Looking ahead of me was a chair. A television in front of it appeared to be filled with static. There was an arm hanging from the chair. A body twitched as I came around. In the chair was a man I didn't recognize, a needle in his arm, a smile upon his lips. I felt a rush and then I snapped to, realizing I now sat in the chair. The television no longer showed static. Instead, it showed a disturbing man advertising a way out. He advertised this way out in many forms. One was money. For the right price, you may find an escape, he said. In this case, all the money in the world would bring about the freedom to buy what you wish, as well as the ability to go anywhere on a whim. Surely you'll be able to buy freedom, he'd gloat. All around, the desperate would beg, every soul giving a higher price. Some would promise their eternal servitude. Others would promise an eternity to be mocked. No matter the price promised, eventually, one would pay a price high enough. All attempted to give. All continued to consume. The next item up was a needle. It promised freedom on the mind. If you were too out of it, the presenter would say, you could be anywhere but here, mentally. A woman offered sex. A man offered his flesh, hoping to win a way out, however fake it may be. Any escape was better than remaining here eternally. His words would echo through my mind as I looked on in horror. In the end, a woman won. She gave up her family's freedom. In the end, all participated, all consumed, except me. Then I saw something that shook me to my core. It was Sarah. The presenter walked her out on a leash like a dog. She sat on all fours, naked, afraid and crying. The presenter smiled as he turned towards the television. I felt as though he spoke to me directly, as he asked, who would like an eternity with this lovely creature? The promise of freedom, a life with this soul, an eternity together after. All this could be yours, dear viewer. I felt a tug inside my body. A yearning overtook my mind. It was too good to be true. If that really was Sarah, I could get my freedom, even if temporary, but at what price? Come now. The presenter's voice rose higher. If not you, then I assure you someone will walk away with this lovely piece. Who knows what they'll do to her? A sudden scream rang from the TV as a man frothed at the mouth, offering up anything. Another stabbed the man, ripping his heart from his chest. I give this, his eerie voice rang out. Another man offered billions. A demonic woman offered 1 billion souls. I felt panic as I cried, I'll give myself in return for her to have another chance at a lifetime of happiness. I'll give up anything. My soul, all of it. I just want her to have another chance at a happy life and a second chance at a better eternity. There was a sudden silence, and the presenter smiled, his voice and appearance growing more demonic as he spoke. Going once. Going. The demon was cut off suddenly by the sound of a woman saying she'd give the demon his freedom in return for Sarah's flesh. I screamed in agony. There was a silence, and then the words, Sold. An unimaginably attractive woman walked up to the presenter before snapping her fingers. The demonic presenter suddenly looked to the sky, smiling and praising something unseeable before burning into flames. There was a whistle from the woman, and then the crowd walked forth. Too late, the woman said into the camera, before smiling and telling the other humans and demons who salivated in hunger that dinner was on her. To my shock and horror, I watched as Sarah was mauled, screaming in horror as her flesh was ripped from her body and those around her ate her. I was heartbroken, and my arms were stretched in the air in hopelessness. I sat there as I heard the woman's voice ringing in my head still. She said something to the effect of how it was a 2-for-1 special, and that it never ceases to amaze her how greedy the gluttons can be. I sat for a moment in silence. I've never felt so much despair. I'd seen the most important person in my life torn from me right when I thought I had a chance to save her. I tried to give all I had to save her, and it wasn't enough. My friends, they were all dead now, and it was all my fault. I felt my body begin to boil as another thought entered my head. It wasn't just my fault. It was that demon's fault. She was the reason Sarah is dead. Those who ate Sarah are responsible. They will all suffer. At these thoughts, I felt a rage welling inside me, and the ground beneath my feet began to give. Many arms reached up in anger and dragged my body into the ground. As I sank, I saw a sea of blood. The arms carried me down like an elevator towards the red-tinted sea. As I looked around, I could see the anger in the arms of those who dug me deeper into this abyss. I did not care at first, only seeing the frustration in my situation. I'd come so far to save Sarah, and it was all for naught. All of this because of stupid curiosity. I thought to myself, why had I goaded my friends into exploring that building? I pushed hard for this trip long before coming. I even talked to everyone into coming. I led my friends to this hell. And with that thought came the realization that I was wet. Wet with the rage inside, and now with the bloody waters I sank into. The strangest part of this was the arms let me go as I touched the waters. I'd have expected them to drag me deeper, and part of me didn't care if I drowned down here. Looking ahead, I saw her, standing on the shore. It was that woman, the demon. She taunted me with a smile, and all at once I felt anger, the likes I'd never felt in my life, exploding outward. I swam with all my might towards the shore, and as I did, I saw the horrible things I'd do to this foul creature. I saw the horrible things I'd do to this foul creature when I reached her. I mentally planned the beating I'd give her. I saw myself stabbing her violently, again, and again. I felt glee as I watched myself tormenting her. I was flooded with images of her despair, and yet, no matter the fantasy, in the end, she'd laugh. I cut her in my mind, my violent fantasy, and she'd laugh with every cut. At first there were tears and crying, but they grew to laughter, and I realized that it was merely a mocking. This angered me more as I reached the shore and realized I had a knife in my hand. I'm not sure where it came from, but I didn't hesitate to stab. I felt the beautiful warmth of blood, but this soon changed to a horrifically black figure that wrapped itself around my arm, and eye appearing from its face. I looked up to see no one there. The demon was nowhere to be found as I ripped this strange being from my arm and ran into a red fog. I soon heard more laughter and would see images of the demon that had taken Sarah. I'd stab, but she'd be gone. I was growing impatient and angry as I ran deeper and blindly into the fog. I was lost, but just when I grew to my breaking point, I'd hear her laughter again. I see a glimpse of her again and stab. Every stabbing I began to see more blood and feel my anger growing ever more. Take that, you dead fool, I'd think. I can do this forever. Every slice was a thing to relish. I no longer cared if I was here or not. I sliced the flesh from this thing again and again. I continued gleefully and laughing until things took a turn. I stabbed the demon through and through once again. This time her smile turned to tears, her face of glee sorrow. The laughter turned to painful cries. The laughter turning to pained cries. In a flash, I went from assured rage and bloodlust to doubt. The fog was uplifting, and as it did, I felt sanity slowly seeping back. It was only now I dropped the knife and stepped back in horror. Looking around, there were bodies. Not one or two, but hundreds. None of them the demon. Looking forth, I saw a woman hanging from a cross. She was beaten, bloodied, and cut to pieces. She gurgled blood before uttering a sentence that made me sick to my stomach. It wasn't your fault. It was now I realized. The woman before me now was Sarah. How? I didn't understand. She was dead. She died during the hellish auction. That's right? That's when I heard familiar laughter. It wasn't a woman's voice. It was the voice of the salesman. The one I swore had burst into flames before my very eyes. He was clapping and laughing. Bravo. You promised us everything in return for her second chance. This played out more beautifully than I could have ever imagined. There was a familiar snickering as the demon smiled. I wanted to be angry, but I was lost in confusion and depression. I was on my knees, the knife in my hand again, looking up at Sarah's dead corpse. In my confusion, I stammered on about how they were supposed to give her a happy life and a second chance at a better eternity, to which I was met with a cold response. Oh, who said you didn't give her that? You can't just leave hell all willy-nilly, or it wouldn't be hell, right? We gave her a second chance at life, which I believe is what you asked. Her second chance at life was to have another chance at escaping hell. The only way she'd get her life back was to do so first. She had every opportunity, as did you when you chased her down, strung her up and murdered her in cold blood. You're a real sicko, you know that? I didn't understand, and I felt a cold sickness overtaking me. I heard the salesman's voice once again. You see, kid, you really gotta understand a deal in a place like this. You need to choose your words carefully. We own you now. You're going nowhere. As such, it didn't take much to make you see what you feared most and send you into a rage. One might say it's too easy. Did you really think we'd kill her with a simple cannibalism? No. We wanted you to do it. It's so much sweeter that way. Am I right? That was when I heard myself, my own voice, resonating from the walls of this hall of dead bodies. I'll give myself in return for her to have another chance at a lifetime of happiness. I'll give up everything, my soul, all of it. I just want her to have another chance at a happy life and a second chance at a better eternity. My exact words reverberated from the walls. They echoed like a ghost from my past I'd never be able to let go. I was no longer angry. I was distraught and in despair. I barely noticed as I heard the salesman say, "Tough break, kid," and laugh, vanishing from the hallway. I crawled up to Sarah and kissed her feet. I was apologizing profusely as I found myself suddenly alone with her body. In a cold, rainy darkness. I was about to pray for forgiveness, but as I was about to speak words of prayer, I realized no God would allow this. Certainly no loving God, I thought to myself. Sarah's body faded into a dark void, and I was completely alone now. I tried to stand, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I heard Sarah's pleas, her screams for me to stop. I could hear her fear in those echoes. She wanted me to snap out of it. She tried reassuring me of who she was. She never understood what I saw. She didn't know why I chased her down. She felt sadness and betrayal as I tied her up, and from the first plunge of my knife into her gut, she said she loved me, and she was sorry how this turned out. I hadn't really snapped to my reality until I practically flayed her, and her entrails hung from her gut into the open air. It was only then I had her telling me what her final breath. It was only then I'd hear her telling me, with her final breath, that it wasn't my fault. I wanted to be angrier, but I felt an intense sorrow. I wanted to be angrier, but I felt an intense sorrow, and though I didn't physically move, I felt myself sinking lower into this darkness. I hated God, but I could not produce the actual emotion of hate. I hated myself, but once again, there was not the emotion of hate. I wanted to be furious with the salesman, but again, I could not be. Every emotion I had, right down to my internal denouncement of God himself, was drowned in intense sorrow. I cried at the thought of the trick played upon me. I cried as I looked to the skies to see nothing but black darkness. I felt rain pour harder upon me as I cried more. No one was listening to me. No one in the sky above cared for me, and they probably never had or ever would. I wanted to laugh at what I believed to be the fallacy of a loving and caring God, but that too was drowned in sorrow and hopelessness. The cold reality was, there was no hope. If God cared so much, would he have led me to hell? If he cared about my friends, would he have let them come with me? No. Life was a cruel game, probably made for his own amusement. We've never had any more of a chance than a character in a video game being controlled by a player. We were nothing more than the NPCs in some twisted game. The logic hit me hard, and it was then I stopped feeling a movement downward. I felt the rain grow heavier, and I stood slowly, listening to the voices of other lost souls around me. Some laughed, others felt pity. It mattered not to me. There was the low roll of thunder, and lightning would light the path briefly before me. Under my feet lay dirt and faces of sadness. I could hear them crying every time I stepped upon them, and I didn't care. As I walked further, I began to see faces within a forest, some buried within trees, others in the trees themselves. In the distance, I saw a single light. I wasn't sure the source, but I walked towards it, uncaring. There were people here, or souls. In the distance, somewhere beyond the horizon, I could hear others begging for their lives. I could hear mad cackling, the glee of a torturer torturing. This was drowned out by the tortured cries of suffering. They never stopped, but I didn't care. I headed towards the light in the forest and heard sounds of others without hope. Within the forest was a heavy feeling of sorrow. There was no hope here. There was only despair, self-loathing, and as I saw bodies hanging from trees, lit by the lightning in the distance, I realized there was suicide. Such imagery of hanging bodies would have shocked or horrified me before, but now I felt a silent agreement within them. Was there a point to life outside of false hope and sad despair? I no longer believe so. Unending sadness wrapped me in its cold arms as the echoes of my deeds hung with me like an anchor tied to my feet. I reached the light within the forest, and it was here a lake lay before me. It was in this lake I knew my fate. My soul forfeit eternally.